Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's scandibim 102 Project Planning Best Practices webinar. So, really excited about this. Last year we did our first scandibim webinar series, and got really great response and interest in that, and lots of requests for additional content. So, this year we decided to take a deep dive into kind of let's call it beginner-ish level workflow steps in the process. And of course, the first place you start is project planning. So yeah, really excited to have the panelists here today. We're gonna have a great discussion about this. There's some great tips and tricks, and you'll see some really cool stuff presented. So I'm jazzed. So quick housekeeping. We are going to, of course, keep everybody muted. If you want to ask a question, please do it through the questions in your GoToWebinar panel on the side of your screen. I see we've already got 3 questions in, including one about Q&A. So great job, you already found the questions panel. We will hold most of the questions to the end. If we're kind of talking about something and I see a question pop in that is relevant to the active conversation, we'll just do it midstream, but we will do Q&A at the end. And we've gotten so many questions in the last instances of this series. We will probably stay late answering questions. I think we stayed about an extra 30 minutes answering questions the last 3 webinars because there were so many questions. So we'll probably do that. All of this is recorded. I see another question about that. So yes, we are recording it, including the Q&A. So if you need to leave early and miss Q&A, or if you've got somebody else at your company, this is recorded. We'll send a link out to the recording in about a week after we have time to kind of process it and edit any inappropriate things that Scott or John say, just pull them out. You never know with those two. So give us a little bit of time, we'll shoot it out after the webinar. So anybody that's registered will get that link. So yeah, with that, let's meet the actual important people to the left of me. So Samantha, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, my name's Sam. I live in Rochester, New York, and I work for Hale Technology and Practice. I'm the high definition laser scanning manager. And I'm a huge Bills fan. So.
Fantastic. All righty. And apparently you have seen the band Walk the Moon live in concert 10 times?
Yep, I would say a lot of those aren't like actual full concerts. They were like music festivals and stuff, but at least 10 times we've counted.
All right. That's a serious fan there. All right. John, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, John Russo with USIBD and Architectural Resource Consultants. I'm out in Southern California, and it's a hot mess out here, but we're not going to talk about that. So I've been in business doing building documentation for, gosh, well, my company's been in business for 24 years. So love this world. It's great. Love measuring every bump on a 1 million square foot building. It's fun. And founded the U.S. Institute of Building Documentation. So if you're not familiar with that, go to our website, www.usibd.org. Check it out.
Absolutely. And you took the record away from King Kong on the Empire State Building doing laser scanning, I believe. Or
we did, yeah. We scanned the Empire State Building antenna mast, which was quite amazing. So
terrifying. I don't like heights. I'm glad that was you and not me.
I love heights. Give me something tall to climb. So.
Ooh. All right, and Scott, please tell us a little bit about yourself, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly, and thanks to Sam and John for being co-panelists with me. When I accepted Kelly's invitation to be on today, I had no idea that 2 of my friends with companies that I've worked with before would also be on the panel, so that was a pleasant surprise. I'm Scott Reed with Prologue. We founded our company about 7 years ago, and like Hailtip, we do, and like ARC, we do scan to BIM, and that is our core function of our business. And we are located in Richmond, Virginia. And fun fact about me is that Kelly asked me to submit a fun fact and I failed to, so he invented this one. And so a fun fact about me is that I'm happy with Kelly submitting my own fun fact.
And now, once we have real live conferences again, I want everybody that sees Scott to challenge him to do the moonwalk because I put this on here.
That's right.
That's his punishment for not submitting a fun fact, is now he's known for being able to do it. Right. So yeah, and a little bit about me, VP of Industry Strategy here at ClearEdge 3D. We make software that helps people that do scandibim work try and make that process more efficient. That's kind of our reason for existence. I'm not going to try and say the French version because I mispronounce it terribly. But yeah, 10 years in practice, then hopped on board to a technology company. And you know, I do play the guitar. I don't think very well, but I do play it at conferences sometime if I'm given enough liquid encouragement. But I actually was much better at swing dancing, which most people don't know. So I love to dance. So if you get liquid encouragement and music at a conference, you'll get stuck with dancing with me probably. So yeah, random facts. All right, let's hit the real stuff. So project planning. So today we're going to try and knock through kind of 4 big topics on this. First, of course, is got to figure out what the heck you're supposed to do. So we're going to talk about the scope of work and how you kind of determine that, some good rules of thumbs there. And then we're going to dive into how do you estimate the work, how do you schedule this kind of work, and we'll spend some time at the end talking about the really exciting subject of contracts and agreements, tongue firmly in cheek. So with that, I'm probably just going to stop sharing the screen here for just a minute, but let's dive into the why and the what of scandibim. Goodness, and so actually, I think the best advice that I've heard about this, and I'll just seed the conversation here, is ask the customer what they're planning to do with what you're going to do for them, as opposed to asking them what they need. Thoughts on this? Because I saw a lot of head nodding.
Yeah, I would agree. You know, like when somebody reaches out to you and they say, hey, we're looking to laser scan this thing, instead of saying, what do you want scanned? I'll say, what are you going to do with the scan? So are they creating a model? Are they using the scan directly? Are they going to be doing as-built? Are they, what's the goal of the scan? And then we can determine how to scan it, what to scan, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say I like to call that defining the intent, and intent defines process. So till you know what the intent is, then you can't figure out what the process needs to be. So.
And I think, Kelly, oftentimes clients will try to answer your question when you ask them what is the intent, instead of saying we are converting a hotel into residential condos. Instead, they will say, well, I want you to scan over here in order to capture the doors and the windows. And I say, no, just tell me what your objective is, and that will define how we can, then we can move on to all those specifics. But I think they're inclined to just tell you what they want you to do, as opposed to tell you what they are trying to do.
Yeah, I have a perfect example. We're bidding a project right now, and you know, there's a lot of discussion about, oh, we need a scandibim, but what they really need is a building permit. So he says, I don't care about the model, I just need a permit. I'm like, okay, that helps a lot. Now we know what we need to and what we don't need to put into this model.
Yeah, right. It's this challenge where I feel like, you know, particularly with things that are relatively new, like scandibim, a lot of times the clients or the customers, they aren't familiar with the actual process or the work that needs to be done. They just, they know they need a scan, or they know they need this. And a lot of times, you know, if you kind of have a specification-based conversation, which everybody, I think there's this easy fallback to specifications, whether it's the LOA, the LOD, blah, 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 whatever it is. It's easy to fall back on specifications, but a lot of times when you do that, they end up specing a bunch of stuff they don't need, right? You know, one of my favorite examples was a big university client, and they sent us a spec that they wanted for their laser scanning for this project, and it included all these things, including color images on every scan. And there were, I think, like 1,800 scans. And this is back when color images took like 10 minutes of setup in the field realistically. And so, you know, I sat down with them and I was like, do you really need color images on all of these scans? And they're like, well, yeah, that's our standard spec. I was like, yeah, but I can literally save you at least half of I can cut your cost in half on this job if you don't want color, like half. Just like, is that color? And I'm like, what are you using it for? And then same conversation ensued. Oh, they're using it to generate AutoCAD plans with their in-house, you know, they had kind of an in-house shop to do some AutoCAD work for as-built on the university. I was like, you're just using for AutoCAD? Why do you want color? Like, that's crazy. You're just drawing like floor plans out of this. It's like, you know, do you really want to spend $200,000 with us or $100,000? 100. Oh. Yeah, all right. Yeah, how about we just get a nice negotiated fee bump for saving you 100K? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and like knowing what they're going to use it for makes a big difference in how you're going to scan it. Like if they're just doing an architectural model, then you're not going to spend a lot of time with extra setups in order to capture the MEPs, or, you know, so just knowing what their goal is really makes a big difference in how you scan it and ultimately the price.
Right. Because you've got to figure out, you know, what kind of scanning you need to do, you know, what kind of modeling you need to do. And, you know, there's so many little tiny decisions that come in with this. You know, how accurately do you want to model a wall? Because do you want them all to be, you know, within 1/4 of an inch of the scan data, or do you want them all to be parallel and perpendicular so that they dimension nicely? And there's all these like kind of downstream impacts of these decisions. And so, you know, it's like 80% of what you need to know once you've been doing this a while is just what is the client going to end up doing with it once you give it over to them. And then the other stuff is what we'll get into later, you know, quantifying how many scans and, you know, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that you don't get that from that, but you learn so much just from understanding that intent. So
I agree, Kelly. And I'm jumping ahead and we don't need to get into it much, but hopefully there's time at the end when we talk about contracts and notice to proceed and all that sort of thing. But as Sam said, understanding what they're going to use the data for is important. Oftentimes when clients get the data, they say, wow, this is super helpful, and I think I could use it for MEP work, even though it was specified or scoped as an architectural project. And that's something that I think all of us in the industry need to be very you know, concerned about or mitigate that risk, because those are two different things. Scanning for architectural is very different from scanning for structural or MEP or documentation or heritage.
well, and you had a great example in our prep call last week, Scott, about how even just something like knowing, you know, if you're just delivering scans to somebody and they're going to do the registration, or if you're just delivering scans to somebody, or registered scans to somebody, and they're going to do the modeling, that's a different scope of work for you than if you're delivering a model that's been delivered from scans. Right.
True.
I thought, you know, I don't know if you want to dive into that a little bit, but I thought that was a really great point.
Well, thank you. It is very true. And yeah, one of the clients that we're working with currently said, you know, we gave them a scope of work that included the field capture, all the survey work and the scanning, and then the ultimate deliverable was a Revit model. And then something changed in their needs, and they said, well, can we just do the scanning portion, and what impact would that have on the fees? And I said it was not zero, because there is there are considerations that go into who's going to be doing the modeling and what the coverage level is and processes and all that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all learn to take shortcuts in the field if we know our team is going to be doing the modeling, because we know our team's strengths, right? But if you're turning it over to a client, there's things you can't shortcut, because somebody that's never worked with scan data before might be the one modeling from it, and they just need more detail, more coverage, more this, more that. Yeah, totally agree.
Yep.
Well, any more thoughts on kind of just this broader scope of work definition? John, Sam, you want to toss anything else out there?
I mean, I have another example of kind of a set of scan data that we got from a client. They're like, they sent us this set of scan data and said, we need you to create an architectural model out of this. And we took a look at it, and it wasn't suitable for the purpose. You know, there were shadows everywhere. There were resolution wasn't right. It was a building shell, a facade. And we started drilling into it a little more. Where did this data come from? And you know, it turns out I knew the provider that captured the data. So I called him up and said, hey, what's with this data? You know, and he's like, oh my gosh, that data wasn't intended to be modeled. They were marketing scans for a contractor that was trying to win a project. And then the contractor got the project and gave the data to the owner. So the owner thought, great, now I got this data. But so the lesson in that is the data suited its purpose perfectly well because it helped them get the job, but it didn't suit the purpose for something further downstream. So again, that intent defines the process. If you were going to model from it, they would have scanned differently.
Indeed.
And I think this is a good segue just to talk briefly about choosing the right equipment. I mean, I don't want to dive into it deeply. We did it in some of the other webinars, but you know, the intent is also super valuable for understanding the type of equipment, because if you've got marketing stuff, I mean, shoot, send out a drone and take a bunch of photographs and do some photogrammetry. You can get amazing results for marketing at a fraction of the cost. But as Scott and John, as you point out, then it's like, oh gosh, now they're trying to use that for dimensional validation. No. But yeah, I mean, the intent, I think, is super important for choosing the right equipment, because there's such a broad range. You've got things like photogrammetry and Matterport and, you know, these relatively low accuracy solutions on one side, but they have great photographs, so they show really well. And then you've got, you know, things like mobile scanning that, you know, gives you medium quality, but, you know, and you can capture such broad areas, you know, huge amount of space in a short time. And then we've got our high-end kind of terrestrial static laser scanning stuff that we're doing that's, you know, very precise, very accurate. And choosing the right instrument is important, I think. But Scott, you know, all of these things kind of have their limit. And I think that's the challenge. It's like, as long as it's easy to do something for a dimensional validation and then use it for marketing. But
right.
You can't do something for marketing and then use it for dimensional validation. You can't move up the accuracy food chain with data that's captured for a lower purpose, right?
Hey, Kelly, if now's a good time to share a screen, if you're able to do that, I'll be the guinea pig to make sure we can do it. But I have one quick visual that gets to your point about strengths and weaknesses of different tools. Is that fair?
You have been made the presenter, sir.
All right, so I'm going to do the drop down box and try and share that screen, and hopefully that worked. And I'm going to pull up this little graphic, if you can see that. Now, this was for a presentation. Somebody said, hey, help us understand the different ways of building documentation. And so I just did a quick comparison. Please don't pick me apart, beat me up about the reds versus the greens and the yellows, but look at all these metrics that we use to evaluate whether you're hand measuring a building, using a total station, which has been around for a long time, or Matterport. This happens to be a Faro, but you could have 6 columns in here for all the different terrestrial static LiDAR machines. And then of course we have the SLAM. There could be a GeoSLAM, that could be so all of these could be broken down. This matrix could be very complicated. You can take the screen back, but I thought this was a quick, high level, good summary for the end user to understand what they're getting and what the best tool would be for the job.
Yeah, and I think it says something about, I guess, the knowledge of the client. Like when they come to you asking for this, how much do they really know about what they're getting? We tend to work with construction and architectural professionals, so they usually have an idea of what they're asking for or what they're getting. But if you're, you know, taking somebody who's going to take a marketing type point cloud and try to use it for modeling, obviously they have a little less knowledge of the overall technology. So having something like this to really explain to maybe somebody who doesn't know it yet would be a good tool.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and we did get an interesting question on this that I want to throw out before we change topics, which is Forrest Huff gave us not so much of a question, but sometimes he gets pulled into scan projects for multiple collaborators on design build or IPD or whatever contracts where you've got multiple people you're doing the scanning for, and they don't really have a why yet. And how would you guys kind of handle that situation if the customers don't really have a clear intent? Curious what your take would be.
I'd be cautious. It depends on their budget, but I'd be cautious.
Yeah.
Yeah, like if they don't have a why, then why are you scanning it? But I mean, I think that you can ask some questions, pointed questions, to try to get to their why. Like, are you looking for documentation to like renovate the space? Are you looking for literally just an as-built that you can look at it? Are you trying to share the information with people that can't go to that space? Like, just, I would say having like a list of purposes or uses for the data, and then asking them, would you want to do this with it? Would you want to do this with it? Would you want to do this with it? Is probably the only way around that.
Yeah, I mean, we did some of these at Beck where, we just knew we needed to scan the job, but we weren't really sure all of the uses of it. And the challenge then is that you always have to, because you can work downstream, but you can't work upstream. So as soon as you tell me something like that, I'm like, okay, I'm pulling out the big guns. I'm showing up with my, with my high-end Leica scanners or my high-end ZNF scanners, and I am, doing a bunch of scans, lots and lots of overlap, because I don't know if this is going to be used for, dimensional accuracy and prefabrication, or if this is, at the high end, or if this is, if it only gets used for marketing, then you way overpaid. But if you don't have a clear intent, I'm going to go to the extreme, because I don't want to get that phone call that Scott talked about earlier, or John talked about earlier. It's like, oh, we're having problems with your laser scans. They're all messed up. So, well, we did them for marketing.
Right.
Tough, right? All righty. Well, let's actually jump to our next topic, which is, of course, estimating the work. I'm not going to share a slide that says estimating the work, but I mentioned this is kind of the previous one. We were talking about kind of what and why, right? Here we're talking about kind of like where and how, right? This is kind of the where and how conversation on estimating. And Sam, I think you've got some stuff to share, so I'm just going to go ahead and make you a presenter while we talk through it. But basically, we've got a lot of stuff to estimate, and I know everybody. My biggest frustration, I think, when I was in practice was people expecting to get square footage pricing for laser scanning. That just every stinking job. Well, it's 10,000 square feet. How much will it cost?
Yeah.
Useless metric. And Sam, why don't you show us why that's a useless metric?
Well, mostly it's useless because it depends on the type of the space and the type of scanning. So I brought up an example here. This is for an office area, and they're just looking for architectural information. So we don't have to do any above ceiling scanning or anything to try to capture the above ceiling MEPs. But basically, when you have an office place like this, you have to scan in every doorway and then at least once in every room. So that kind of doubles the number of scans that you have, not to mention that the offices are congested. So you might have like a 12 by 12 foot office, you have to scan in each one of those, where if it was a 24 by 24 open space, you only scan once. So really it's the number of scans and the time that it takes to scan, if you're doing a lower resolution versus higher resolution, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, in this example, they're all low resolution scans, we assume, in black and white, and we basically use the floor plan to try to plan out how many scans we have to take. And then figure out how long that'll take, and then how much money that'll cost. So we do keep track of square footage costs that we have bid out, and so we can try to give a good idea of, like, if it's warehouse space, about this much per square foot. But honestly, if you just give me a square footage, I'm going to quote you a higher number than if you give me a floor plan, because there's a lot of uncertainty in that. I don't know what's going on in there. I can't really make a good determination, so it's going to be a higher number. I'm going to add like a contingency fee to it, and you're going to pay more.
Right. Yeah, if you got a warehouse space, is it full of high bay racking? Is it wide open? Is there materials in the way? There's a lot of things like that will affect your scan count. So
yeah, pictures are one of the things I've always appreciated about this, because people will call me with square footage and I'll be like, well, I can't give you a quote on square footage, but if you'll go take 30 or 40 pictures of the space and send those to me, then I can probably give a quote on square footage. It's always better to have pictures and a plan. But Scott, I think, didn't you say you were like actually shipping cameras or 360 cameras to people to have them capture stuff before you quote?
We do if the project merits it, of course. And on a tiny thing, it probably doesn't make sense to do so. But on larger projects, we will ship a Ricoh Theta camera to the client with a self-addressed stamped, package for them to return it to us. And all they have to do is go out to the site and just take picture. I mean, it's literally 3 minutes for that, or as long as it takes to walk through a site, capture as many pictures as they want to, and ship it on back to us. And so that all the data, all the pictures are on the device itself when we get it. And so that will greatly inform how we go about approaching a project, for sure. And I would say one step beyond that, of course, is for larger projects still, a site visit. I cannot overemphasize the importance of a site visit, whether it's in your backyard or across the country. A $500 plane ticket to go see a big facility across the country and maybe a day of your time will pay dividends compared to getting underwater with a project where you had underestimated the complexity. So I think that it depends on the magnitude of the project as to what tool you use to understand what's there before you launch off and do an estimating exercise.
Scott and Sam, when you guys get a project opportunity that maybe it's a secure site of some sort where they don't allow photography, and maybe they don't even give you a plan, what's your guys' general approach on that?
Sam, I've got some thoughts.
I mean, for the takeoff specifically, I mean, we'll do what we can with what we have. And so hopefully they can give us a floor plan and they're willing to share some photos with us. We can sign any sort of agreements that they need so that we don't share that information. When it goes to actually scanning, you have to be, I guess, a little vague about your language, which sounds wrong. You have to make sure that they understand what you're doing and you are taking photos of the space essentially. And if they don't want things seen, they're going to have to cover them. But when you're actually when you're with the people who are managing that job, you have to be very clear about what's going on. But then when you're doing the actual scanning, you just have to be really vague with people that ask you questions, because you have permission to be there. You're doing what you're hired to do, and you can't let people kind of sideline you by saying like, "Are you taking photos?" No, it's a 3D measurement of the space.
It does feel funny, John. That's a good question. It feels funny to go to a confidential location or facility and you have to hand in your telephone for fear that you're going to be taking pictures. And meanwhile, you're taking 3D pictures of the entire place. So there's a little bit of a juxtaposition there. But in terms of pricing the work, I think that's a good question. And you just need to be very guarded. Cover your bases in your contract language and your proposal language. If you can't have access to plans or pictures, there's a time and materials or not to exceed figures, or there's other ways to protect your business interest there. And then I can't underestimate the value of trusting the partners that you work with. I'd be far more inclined to do that with somebody I've worked with before and had a good relationship with, like Hail Tip or ARC. I wouldn't bat an eye about going into a project not having seen pictures or plans, but For a new client, that gets tricky.
No doubt. Well, and it's not just the scan setups. You know, so that is obviously a big part of the estimate. But Sam, I think you've got some examples also of the kind of plans you show your client to deal with logistics, because that can have a huge impact on the price.
Yeah,
Right?
I do. So basically, we take that takeoff, that scan location takeoff, time takeoff. I add any sort of extra time to it I think we'll need for things like site safety meetings, walkthroughs, so on and so forth. And then I convert that into a number by chart. You know, we do a number per hour usually. Once we have all that and we've starting to schedule the work, we have a client meeting where I bring up a floor plan of the space and we kind of walk through what we're doing, where we're going to be, when, any information that we need. So this would be an example of a large job client meeting PDF that I have set up. So we kind of color code it to say the red areas are spaces we can only be at certain times or need special permission to be in. So we have to talk about that with the client to see if there's, you know, any special procedures we have to follow for that. For instance, when we do roof scanning, we have to call their security team, tell them we're going to be on the roof and for how long, and then we have to tell them when we get off of the roof. So we get all that information down. Blue areas are night scanning only, so we can only be in there after 8 p.m. Basically, we're just trying to show the client that we have this planned out, we know what we're doing, and they don't really need to be worried while we're on their site. We also get information like the manager's name or phone numbers that we have to call while we're on site, people that can help us out get into locked spaces and that sort of thing. So you'll see I have my note here that says no lift required. Sometimes if there's ceilings and they're high ceilings, we have to talk to them about accessing ladders and lifts and those sorts of things. So there's just a whole list of things we go through with the client, and then they know that they have confidence in us while we're on site, and we know who to contact if we need to contact everybody.
Yeah, this is one of those, I think, when I first really started doing this, other than just for our internal projects, this was probably the second place that I got burned. First place was, giving a number too readily on a project and then showing up and the project was nothing like what I expected and it took way more scan setups, right? But logistics, I think, is one of those things that burns you pretty quickly after that. Just not having access to something and then having to extend your stay and stay there for an extra day, at your cost because it wasn't covered in your contract and it wasn't defined in your deliverable, in your agreement anywhere, right?
Yeah.
And that those are never fun conversations to have, regardless of whose fault it is with the client. It's like, oh, well, we couldn't scan this side of the building because your security team wasn't there to unlock it. Well, we didn't know you needed the security team there to unlock it. Did you think I was going to bring lock picks or something? You locked it,
And you'll notice, like, I don't have a lot of specifics after. This is like a filled out one after the client meeting. I don't have a lot of specifics, like we'll be in this space at this time. We'll do it between these times on these days. And that's because you need a plan, but you need a flexible plan because things change on the fly constantly. Especially if it's an occupied space, you might go to scan something and realize that you can't get in there for another hour. So you really just have to be prepared to kind of move around. So have a general plan. We're going to try to start in this area and move this way, but be prepared to change that on a moment's notice because it's going to change. There's no way that you're going to stick to your original plan completely. There's just too many variables that come into it.
I think there are some things you can do with your contract language to at least help protect you or give you a chance at getting additional compensation if you get delays due to not being able to gain access. We always put that in our contracts that that we'll have access during our mobilization, and if that's not that doesn't happen, then you have at least a chance at a legitimate ad service. So,
and that's not only access, but sequential access as well is a big part, and ready and efficient access.
That's a good point, because you could be jumping all around. Okay, now you can have this room, and now you can have that room, which that's more like doing a hotel project or something. Right. Guest rooms. Right. But you already have that factored in for something like that.
Convention centers, I've done a fair amount of convention center scanning, and it's just like, it's always just like, oh, well, 3 days before you show up after having a plan, like, oh, we scheduled somebody in this room, so we can't do that room, then we're going to move you over here. It's like, how do I get all this connected? Which is actually a fantastic segue for what's now on your screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that was the third thing that burned me, was getting out to, getting on some more complex jobs, and then, thinking I was going to be able to register it one way, which was nice and fast and efficient, and then getting pulled into a bunch of different rooms non-contiguously, and having to do a lot more targeting and survey control. Having that understanding of how you're going to get all the data stitched together that's another big leg of the overall cost of the project. So
yeah, so this is kind of a layout that we make for the scan team. So they'll take this out in the field with them, and we split different areas up into, color code them kind of, but just different manageable spaces so that you can scan this entire space at one time and then move on to the next space. And then you'll see we've got these kind of red outlines on areas where there's connections between those spaces. So that tells the scanning team, you need to have a plan for connecting these during the registration. So are you going to put target boards up there and leave them the whole time? Are you going to do scans in the same exact location and do a cloud to cloud? It really depends on the space and where it is too. If it's a high traffic area, target boards might not be the best option because somebody might tear them down or move them or something like that. So really we use this for multiple things. Tracking field time. So we have a general good idea of how long each of these spaces should take. And so we're saying, do this area and then do this area. We also use it for managing the area. So we know where we've been, where we need to be, and where the connections are while we're in the field. And then finally, we use it for registration because the registration team looks at this to determine how we're going to connect the different spaces. And we generally register it like this is mapped out. So like this one big orange space will be all one cluster in our registration, and we'll match that to the clusters next to it, and so on and so forth. So it really kind of, this document makes its way through the whole process.
Hey Kelly, I know we're sort of short on time a little bit, but I'd love to share my screen with one other thing that may be a useful concept for the attendees here as they're thinking about projects. If you give me that and monitor one. All right, I'm going to pull up, hopefully you see the same spreadsheet here. I'm gonna pull up this one. So you had mentioned a price per square foot, and I totally agree with you. That's almost impossible to do, but we got that question so much from so many clients, we realized instead of resisting that, let's sort of embrace it and try and figure that out. I don't expect you to look at any of these numbers, but it's just a lot of different scan jobs and a lot of different scan numbers, and we've classified them by category such that we could build a pricing tool. And that looks a little bit like this. Don't get caught up in the numbers or anything, but here we have a little bit of fixed cost stuff that we add in, some travel component. And this was designed so that we could price a job only on square footage, right? And so we enter in a square footage, the number of levels, and then we categorize the space by several different types. There's hospitality with guest rooms, there's industrial space, there's warehouse space, all these different types. And each one of these has a different metric over here for fixed fee, hourly rates, interior scan rates. All this sort of lends itself to the mobile scanning, but it does spit out at the end of the project a total fee and a price per square foot fee, all in. Now that should not have anything to do with the modeling part, but just the field capture part.
Yeah.
I don't expect anybody to follow any of that, but with enough data and enough experience, you can ascertain some of that price per square foot, as long as you can categorize it and you average it over all of your different projects.
Well, and I loved looking at the distribution because I'm a big Excel geek. But you could see in there that there's a pretty wide band around that average, and then there's some outliers on both sides. And this is why, you know, as Sam said, we're going to price it higher.
Yeah, those outliers can trip you up for sure if you don't account for them.
I'm not going to be in the middle of, I'm not pricing on the middle of that fit line. I'm pricing up at the very top of that fit line, right? And yet it might be an outlier that I'm not accounting for, and oh man, that sucks. But I'm you're paying more if you can't get more information. But no, I think that was I was very happy with your Excel foo there.
I think what Scott and Sam point out is it's good to note that if you guys are going through, you know, doing these projects, you're going to start to build up a whole bunch of data, historic data on everything you guys are doing. So, you know, it's important to come up with those kind of key metrics, those things that you want to track and how you classify the jobs, because just over the course of time, you know, if you're keeping track of all this stuff, you're going to have some powerful data to work with and extract out some information that's really going to help you in quoting your jobs.
Great
yeah,
point,
SOX is really pretty. We have something like that, but it doesn't look even close to as well organized as yours. It's just rows and rows of data.
Right.
It's nice to see all this stuff. The last topic I kind of wanted to hit in this estimating part is staffing. So you know, I think we can be pretty quick about it, but you know, I think the biggest debate that I hear, and this is part of scaling, you know, between being a one man or you know, a 2 or 3 person or whatever shop, and then really growing to a firm that does this, you know, a lot, like the other 3 people on here represent. But you know, the thing that we started with was, oh, well, whoever's doing the scanning is leading the modeling or engaged in the modeling, right? And there's some good reasons behind doing that when you're small, because it's easy. And that way the person in the field knows the project when they're doing registration, and then they're helping guide the modeling. But as you get bigger, you hire people that don't know how to model, that are doing scanning, and you have registration techs, and then you have people that are really good modelers. And so I wanted to spend just a minute kind of chatting about you know, what you guys are doing to kind of mitigate that as you scale and grow. You know, how do you make sure that you don't have that, you know, critical loss of information moving from the field to the processing and the processing into the modeling? John, I'm gonna pick you first.
Yeah, I mean, resources are critical, and you know, everyone has limited resources, whether, you know, it's 5 or 50, you know, they're still limited. So you know, what we found is, you know, you always want to maximize your internal resources. That's gonna be the most cost effective. You have the most control over that. But it's, you know, we've found it's also it's worked well for us in most cases to have a partner network where you can go out and you know, find other you know, people that have the skills that you need to complete these projects, and we team with people in those cases, so you don't have to pass on the work, or you can still meet the client's deadlines even if your internal resources are tapped out.
Yeah, and Sam, Scott, either you want to jump in on that topic?
I'll just say one of the awful things about COVID is it's killed all these conferences. And at the conferences is where I met Kelly originally years ago. And I think, John, you and I met at some conference, and of course, Greg and the HailTip folks and a whole group of others. And I've missed those dearly, because that is where you get to know people. Zoom is a substitute, I suppose, and I have met some folks through different venues. But our network of folks that we rely on is huge and growing, and I think super valuable, and it should not be considered a threat. I think, as Kelly mentioned, that, you know, our competitors are not necessarily a threat, but should be an asset to us all performing our work better.
Yeah, and I'll do a quick shout out, because I mean, ultimately the cancellation of conferences is kind of why we put this program together, because these conversations normally happen at conferences. We set up a LinkedIn group, so I'm sure people that saw the posts and stuff on social media have seen this. If you haven't joined or haven't participated, get in there. It's a great place to ask questions. There's also places like the laser scanning forum that you can go on and ask questions that are really focused on laser scanning. We didn't really see something out there that was kind of soup to nuts process oriented. So we kind of set this up as a LinkedIn group. So that's the Scandibim University LinkedIn group. I've got it here on the screen. And there's some really great organizations out there to help. And John, as mentioned earlier, is president of USIBD, but this was set up, gosh, how many years ago now, John?
2012 is when we officially came into operation, and it was really kind of an organic thing where I got up and presented at the SPAR conference the concept of USIBD, and there was, I think, maybe 30 people in the room. And at the end of that session, was the foundation of our leadership team. People came together, other practitioners in the industry, all struggling with the same issues, needed a resource, and one didn't exist at the time. So we created USIBD to help with, education, standards, guidelines, just keeping up on technology and the latest stuff. And I think most importantly, just a place to network with other folks. So
that's actually the same year I think Edgewise officially launched as a product on the market. So 2012. But yeah, it's I think there's a lot of good resources out there. They're not, I think, a replacement for face-to-face, but they're hopefully a temporary stand-in. So that was a great point, Scott. Sam, you had mentioned something the other day about always sending at least 2 people on the job and kind of that equipment planning side, because I know when I got started, it was like there was just me and the laser scanner. So it was always, a one-person job. But as soon as we scaled, of course, we immediately saw the benefits to 2. So I don't know if you want to briefly kind of talk about that.
Yeah. So we actually have 3 laser scanners. We're a relatively small team. We've got like 10 people in our office, I believe. We try to keep everyone able to do all the work that we do, but we definitely have people that specialize more towards scanning and people that specialize more towards BDC modeling type work. So when we go into the field to do a scan job, we really have to decide how many people we're going to send. For large jobs, I would say we almost always send a minimum of 3 people with at least 2 scanners. And that's just because multi-day jobs, it's nice to be able to rotate people out. So that people don't get too tired or, burnt out, basically. They can take breaks and you can continue scanning and get the job completed quicker because you're rotating who's scanning. Also, we generally do multiple services for all of our scanning jobs. So we'll do a drone flight, we'll do 360 photos. So having that 3rd person there to do that extra work is really useful. Again, with timing, it just makes it go faster. And then finally, we might have that person actually scanning on site. So that kind of speeds up the entire process. So you're not waiting for scanning to finish in order to start registering. You're actually registering while you're scanning. So those are kind of things we think about when we staff projects. We might send 1 person if it's relatively close to the office, but generally if we're traveling, it's almost always 2 people at least.
I don't want to repeat what Sam said, but she nailed it. I totally agree with everything she just said. And I'll just add that our belief at ProLog is that a good scanner makes for a better modeler. Similarly, somebody who knows how to model makes for a better scanning operator, I should say. So for that reason, we cross-train a lot, but we still do have specialties, and that sort of blurs the boundary between who does what and this jump from 1-person outfit to a scalable operation.
Yeah, and I guess it's nice to have the same people scanning do the registration, but it's not always possible. And then also have those people do the modeling. So really what that comes down to is documentation. Taking really good field notes. We actually do a scan map where we write the number of every single scan and where it was taken. And then we digitize that as a PDF so that can get turned over to the people doing registration. And I would say, especially for really big jobs, it's very important because those connection pieces are a really big deal. If you don't have your connections right in the registration or the scanning, then it's going to take forever to bring it all together. So having that documentation is really important, whether the same person's doing it or not.
Could not agree more. We also, something we found was just kind of standardizing acquisition practices really helped, because if you didn't know who's going to do the modeling of the registration and how good they were at making certain things work, or you just didn't want them angry at you when you sent them the data, things like, taking 2 scans in every doorway. That was, we started taking 2 low-res scans on either side of every doorway instead of 1 scan in every doorway, just because we found that did much better for cloud-to-cloud registrations. And if the job was going to use cloud-to-cloud, that just became a standard practice. So there's things like that you can do. Obviously, take oodles of photographs. All of those things help translate field conditions to whoever is ending up doing registration, and super helpful for modeling, particularly the photographs. And that way you can get away with maybe not taking as many scan locations with photographs if you've got lots and lots of photographs that you've taken just in the field with a decent camera. Yeah. So that's actually a good segue into scheduling. And we don't have a ton of time, so on the scheduling side, the one thing I wanted to kind of throw out was, everybody wants projects faster. So where do you guys kind of see opportunities to slipstream or compress project schedules? Because I'm sure anybody that's doing one of these jobs has already had a client say, oh well, I 3 weeks is too long. Can you get it to me in 2 weeks or whatever?
So for us, one of the places you can kind of blur that line is what I just said, where you send that extra person to actually start registering while you're on site. And then I think the second opportunity would be if you have another person setting up the model ahead of time. And obviously you need the right documentation to be able to do that. You'll need good plans with like levels and grids and things for that to be useful at all. But you could, that's the other place where I could see trying to, crunch the schedule.
And I know one thing that I had employed was phasing the deliverables. So a lot of, the clients will of course come to you and say, I need to have it all done by X. And you're like, well, do you need to have it all done by X? Because I can't do that, but I could get this done by X, right? And, being able to kind of break a project up into a couple phases, so you can be like, all right, well, we'll run this through the ringer as quickly as possible and then kind of move on to the next thing, so that we get you something to work with, so you can start design on level 1, but it's going to take a couple more weeks before we get you level 2, or a couple more weeks before we get you level 3.
It might be too much in the weeds here to get into the BIM 360 thing, but that is a great tool to be able to help with that interim deliverable process. It can be very disruptive to quickly churn out floor plans if your final deliverable is a Revit model, because you want to build walls intelligently and understand the whole building and maybe do the shell first. But if you are distracted by trying to build out bathroom partitions and fixtures and FFE stuff just to get a floor plan out the door before you return to get the whole model, that's a distraction. It can be very troubling. So BIM 360 doesn't necessarily solve that, but it is a nice tool. It comes with its complications and its challenges, but it is a tool that can help mitigate some of those challenges.
And that's actually exactly what I was going to say, is that we've actually done a few projects where we've worked on the client's BIM 360 profile, I guess. So the model is hosted to their company's BIM 360, and we work on it while they're working on it. The other thing we do is use BIM 360 to have multiple of our people working on it at the same time. So this person's working on this scope, and this person's working on this scope, and so on and so forth. So we're actually modeling at the same time instead of waiting for something to complete and moving on to the next one.
I think that's a great plan, because we've done that too, where one of the benefits, there's obviously a lot of transparency with the client, right? They can see how fast you're producing or not. Hopefully you're keeping pace with where you need to be. But one of the valuable things that I found is you're able to get that early client feedback, so they can see what you're doing, how you're building things, you have an opportunity to make adjustments as you go, so that it doesn't become a big rework thing later once you deliver. You can make those adjustments, you know, and prevent that rework. So I think that's really valuable.
It may sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, but oftentimes the interim deliverables that they want do not need to cause big disruptions. And sometimes literally a slice of a point cloud may be able to get them what they need. They're just looking for something to be able to sketch on and do some conceptual ideas and bounce it off the owners or the rest of the stakeholders. So that's something that ought to be thrown out there as just cutting a slice through your point cloud and handing that off. Even put it on a pretty Revit sheet with your title block, and sometimes that'll buy you the time you need.
Yeah, and I think one of the big challenges with laser scanning is it's a very much a truth-based deliverable and trust-based deliverable, in the sense that, you know, the first time the client finds something wrong with it, they then no longer trust any of it. So it's not one of these, I think, things where you can kind of sacrifice on quality to meet an aggressive schedule very easily. You know, there's the iron triangle, right? Cost, schedule, and quality. But you know, once the owner has kind of given you an idea of what their intent is, that the quality is kind of anchored. You can't really do much there, and so it's one of those things where you have to kind of find other ways to get them data that doesn't sacrifice on quality. So yeah, you know, fortunately we brought some of the topics for contracts and stuff up as we went, which is great. But you know, the one, I'll do a quick statement about it, and then we'll dive into Q&A. There's a couple contract related questions in Q&A, so we'll kind of cover that in there as well. But the one thing I'd say about contracts is, you know, we talked about a lot of different things that can go wrong earlier in the webinar. And anytime you hear something that can go wrong, that's the kind of thing you need coverage for in your contract. And so, you know, I don't know of any great resources out there for, you know, a standard, you know, building documentation contract. I know, you know, I had the one that we over time evolved at Beck. I know Scott's got his stuff, and Sam and Greg have theirs. I'm sure John's got his. But, you know, really it's thinking about, you know, how do you protect yourself for those things that can go wrong, whether it's mobilization, getting asked to go out and, you know, give a quote on something when you don't have complete information. If you're on the requester side, what I will say though on that end is there are some good documents. So John mentioned earlier USIBD, we talked about it a little bit. For members, which is, by the way, like, John, what's membership cost per year?
Membership's rather affordable. It's, you know, we have a group membership and we have individual memberships, and the individual is only like 250 or 250.
Yeah, for 250 a year, which, you know, by the time you've written an RFP from scratch, you've already burned that in billable hours. You know, you can get an RFP template, the LOA template, a whole bunch of really great resources with USIBD. So anybody that's kind of new to this and it's like, oh, we need RFPs and RFQs and we got to do all this stuff, just get a freaking USIBD membership and save yourself a ton of time and stress, right? Like seriously, it's $250, it's nothing. And your company pays for it probably. So make it happen. And that will help out a lot with agreements and documentation that goes with those contracts, because then you can have some good specifications and, you know, stuff that's been hammered and battered by time by other USIBD members. So with that, let's dive into Q&A. Now, again, for anybody that joined us part of the way through, this is all being recorded, including the Q&A. So if you've asked a question but you have to go because we're at time, it's recorded in the Q&A, and we'll send that link out to everybody in about a week. You know, if you want to see the first half or whatever, ditto. But let's take some questions here. I saw a couple good ones that came in nice and early, though. Gregory Simmons said boo to the Bills fan, and I have to agree. we won't spend much time on that. So not quite in the vein of what we were talking about earlier, but I do want to ask this. Does anybody kind of have a list of like FAQs that of things that typically come up on jobs? We had one of the attendees ask if that's something that we'd be willing to share. I don't have one, but like just a frequently asked kind of questions or issues that come up on your jobs. Do any of y'all have one of those?
We put together, if I can jump in, we do one particular type of scanning for confirming rough ends before concrete is poured. We call it ready set. And so we've developed a pretty good portfolio of resources around that, because it's not a commodity by any stretch, but we do them repeatedly. It's pretty standard workflow. So we put together a what to expect documentation. So that talks about when we mobilize, how to prepare the site, what control we need, how can they use the data, what's it going to look like, all this. That's the closest thing that we have to an FAQ, but I like the idea. It's a good question that somebody asked on there. I think it would make sense to have that for just scanning scandibims more generally.
Hey, John, maybe that's something we could play around with in USIBD.
I was just thinking that sounds like the perfect thing for USIBD.
All righty. Well, let's keep an eye open for that then. Once we have that pulled together, we'll put it in the Scandibim University LinkedIn group.
There you go.
So there's a question about ISO 19650 from David Craigs, and I am not an ISO anything. I don't know, is anybody on this call ISO certified, or is their company ISO certified? No? Okay, well, we may be a terrible resource for answering this question then. Apparently there's something in this called the scenario-based information requirement that aligns with the intent defines the process. So John, you may have found something in ISO to look up.
I would like to investigate that more, because that's exactly my philosophy. So
yeah. All right. What types of steps can be taken by the scanning team to limit the impact on the site on a live or an active hospital, i.e. not disrupt typical operations and protect HIPAA data and all that kind of stuff? Anybody got some hospital scanning experience they want to talk about there?
We haven't done anything recently, but I guess I would just say, talking to the end client. So maybe you're not working for the hospital, but talking to people at the hospital before you get there is probably the most important. So like having that setup meeting where you say, this is what we're going to be doing. If you don't want us in these places at these times, let us know. That kind of stuff, just knowing, where you're allowed to be and when. You probably have to consider off hours scanning. Just because they're less busy generally, at night or maybe on weekends at the hospital, it's always busy. So you also have to really consider what type of registration you're going to use. So, if it's in a really busy area, maybe you actually want to go cloud to cloud because you have a lot of traffic, and that'll help you with your registration on the back end. You might probably have to do more setups because you have people walking around. Like just that kind of stuff. How can you mitigate the fact that there are going to be people there, and how are you going to do it around them? Not only the actual data collection, but also on the back end, how are you going to handle that?
I think another real critical thing to address up front is, which, if any, areas require infection control. That can really slow you down in the field, especially if you're doing above ceiling, and if you are doing, here you go, perfect. These HEPA carts are, there's different ways you can create, when you pop a ceiling tile, you can, use for infection control. The HEPA carts are a great tool if you haven't used one. They're easy to contain all the contaminants that come out of the ceiling. There's other methods. We've been in situations where if the client's providing the infection control, they've showed up with those zip poles and the plastic, and it just is really difficult to work inside of one of those structures. And then, you know, there's rules about, you know, getting in and out of those structures and bringing contaminants with you. So it's critical that you address that.
I don't know. Sorry, Kelly, are we good? I think either you're muted and my mic is bad, but I'll try to.
I was muted. You go.
Make one more comment that's not really to do with the hospitals, but it's more so in hospitals. Those of us who scan in the field oftentimes feel like other people are getting in the way of our work, and which they are. And it is annoying. And you think, how in the world can somebody just go trip over a sphere that's used as a target? I constantly remind our folks on our team that we are in their way, actually. And in a hospital, it's going to be even more so. So I think the differentiator between a surveying company that, or not surveying, a laser documentation company, laser scanning company that can go in with kid gloves and stay out of the way, realize we're in imposition. It's going to take twice as long because every time you go to set up, somebody's going to come and ask you to move because they're wheeling a gurney by. It's just going to be much more so in a hospital. So I'm not speaking of the infectious, you know, parts and all of that, but I think it's even more, it's a critical thing to think about, especially in a hospital setting.
Absolutely. Sorry, my mute button's like acting on delay. It's interesting. Yeah, the HEPA cards will just, I mean, if you have to do infection control, that will increase the time that you have to spend in the field by, you know, 5x easily. And it's massive, massive time impact. But just, you know, whether it's hospitals or, you know, hotels where you've got, you know, people in there in operation. I mean, it's the key thing is really, really tight coordination is what Sam said earlier, really tight coordination with the operations staff there, and spend the time to get to know them, and they will help you. If you just kind of roll in and, you know, treat them like an obstacle, they will fulfill your fears and be an obstacle. So just really building that relationship with the operations staff will make a difference between you getting that project done on time and on budget, or just be beating your head against a wall. I loved what you said, Scott, about, you know, we're actually in their way. It's not a building designed for scanning. It's a building designed to treat people with sickness. Right. Fantastic. Let's see. What kind of workflows can be used? What kind of workflows can be used to capture surfaces or meshes to be utilized in clash detection? So, and there's a couple of clash detection questions related here. Anybody want to dive in on that?
What was the first part of that?
What kind of workflows can be used to capture surfaces or meshes to be utilized in clash detection? I'm going to combine it because Curtis had an earlier question for an existing site, particularly when within ceiling and soffit areas. So it sounds like what they're trying to do is capture an existing, you know, MEP, and then presumably there's some kind of renovation, and they're wanting to, you know, route new work through that existing work and run clash detection on it.
This raises one point I'd like to touch on, but I'll turn it over to let the others speak to what type of workflows. The biggest thing that comes to my mind is understanding the control system and the control network. If you're going to be combining laser scan data or point clouds with some sort of design component geometry, they need to be put together. And you can either do that very crudely by manually nudging things into place, but that is not something that we generally do. Or you can do that through some sort of survey control or a control network. And that brings up the point of every site has a different local control versus state plane control, different benchmarks, different everything. And that trips up so many different projects, merging all of that information together, or selecting which information is pertinent for your task, for the task at hand.
Yeah, I mean, just in general with registration, getting stuff on large projects, it's super useful. But anytime you're combining data sources, yeah, it becomes essential. I know, you know, you can clash point clouds. So Navisworks will let you do that. That works moderately well for certain things. I found it's a pretty effective way to clash new MEP against existing structure, because you usually get pretty clean data on structure, and so you don't get a lot of false positives. I find that particularly when doing like above ceiling scans or dealing in congested space, there's too much noise on the scan data to really do that effectively. You'll get all sorts of clashes that's just edge bleed off of something. Then you really kind of are down to needing to model. And at that point, there's a host of modeling tools. Obviously, I would recommend Edgewise. It's really good at MEP. It does a really good job connecting things with gaps, which you have a lot of gaps when you're doing above ceiling scans. Ultimately, you're going to need to generate models of those things to probably run an effective clash detection. That also makes it much easier for the people designing the new systems that are used to working with models to just go in and design around it in the first place. If you hand them a point cloud, so often they'll just be like, I don't know how to do this. And they'll just do their thing, and you get to catch all the clashes later, right? But if you give them a model, they'll be like, oh, there's a pipe there. I guess I should draw around that pipe. One way to mitigate risk, so I think here we're getting into some contract. So Brian Laird said, one way to mitigate risk is stating your assumptions on the level of effort. Hey, we estimate 150 scans. If we go over by 15%, a change order may be required. So that's kind of setting a maximum number on what your estimate was. So I think that's a great tip. In terms of if you're doing a quote without a lot of information, putting something on there. So not really a question.
No, that's true. That's true, Kelly. That is a sort of a conservative way to do that. But we didn't get much into the pricing component of this thing, and we don't need to go there right now. But there's several ways that come to my mind for the way our company does pricing, and that is, we know our sort of internal cost, like that's just no profit, no anything, just what it costs to get out of the job and do something. And we know what our internal hurdle rate is. But all that aside, what I'd rather do is be able to price based on value. And I think that is not a gouging approach. That is I think the clients appreciate that as well. And so understanding what the value is there is to the client can inform pricing. And when we price based on numbers of scans, I think that brings us all down to the sort of lowest common denominator, almost. Now, that may be a controversial comment, and I apologize if I shouldn't make it, but anybody can go out and do 200 scans. They could price a job, say, I'll do 200 versus 150. Being smart about how you capture the data, I think it far exceeds the number of scans that are taken.
Well, I think Brian's point is a good one, about assumptions, because assumptions, they basically are kind of stating what you're assuming coming into it, right? There's so many variables in putting our pricing together, and you're making a lot of assumptions you don't know. So if you state those in your contract, like Brian's suggesting, whether it's number of scans or some other metric or assumption, now you at least have something you can go back and go, well, this is what we assumed when we put our pricing together, and it clearly turned out it's nowhere near this. So,
right.
I think now you're at least on a solid footing to go back and have that discussion about an ad.
Well, I totally agree, and I didn't mean to dismiss Brian's question as a bad one. I think it's a great one. We do that oftentimes. In fact, a section in our contract is assumptions, and we just list what's informed our pricing for going into a job. That sort of puts a positive spin on, instead of you will give us access to every room and there will not be pedestrian traffic from this and this type. That sort of demands on them that it can be offensive, and instead we say, we have assumed in pricing this that there will be limited traffic. We will have access sequentially throughout the building, and the list goes on. There will be lighting in there, there will be power in there, there will be parking within a reasonable. So I agree.
Yeah, we do something really similar, and we might add like a floor plan with highlighted areas and say these are the areas we're scanning, and that way if there is some sort of scope creep, we can kind of say this is our hourly rate for scanning beyond this scope. So we'll add in, this is our per hour price, and if we go beyond what we've specifically outlined here, there may be additional costs.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take a hard position on the number of scan things, but somebody
you're
could come out with a BLK and say, I'm going to get 1,000 scans. Well, that's a different deal than another approach you may have a lot fewer. So, sorry.
Well, it's, you don't. This is the challenge with making selections based on specs, right? It's like,
Right.
just because somebody takes the most scans doesn't mean they're giving you the best result. It just meant they took the most scans. Brian also had some other great advice, communicating unexpected delays and unforeseen issues to the client right away. That is true on any type of project ever in business. The moment something goes wrong, call the client so they're not surprised. You never want to surprise your client down the road. And the sooner you tell them, the easier it is to get those funds, right? The easier it is to get a change order. You don't want to call them the day before a deliverable is due and be like, oh, we're going to be 2 weeks late and we're going to need another $10,000. They're going to be really angry and say no. Yeah, no doubt. Let's see, we kind of answered those during the call. Have you worked on any large scale projects with multi-phases where the intended as-built is really a consolidated, series of scans over time of the site, and then delivered that using tools like Send2 or a cloud solution? There's another deliverable question in here we'll hit next as well, but I thought that was a nice question from Curtis. Anybody doing a lot of kind of sequential as-built scanning on projects?
We do. We do a lot of stuff like that for schools, for school districts. So they generally have phased construction because they try to keep school open, or do it just summer work and then they're open the rest of the year and then they work again the next summer. So we do have quite a few projects like that where we go back every couple months and scan a separate area. I guess for those projects, it's really important to set up ahead of time how you're going to attach those areas and deliver them. So we do use Send2 a lot to do that. We also just deliver hard drives to people as needed, but we do a lot of overlap in our scanning when we have those types of projects. So we'll say we're scanning this area, but we're actually going to scan, the hallways all around this area the first time we go out. And that way, the next time we go, we're going to get overlap with our previous scans in order to, match everything together. And then the other thing that we sometimes do is bring in a survey control system. So we'll either, in the past, I've worked for companies where we have our own total station and we do our own survey control. And I've also worked where we hire a surveyor to come out with us and actually do survey on some of our target boards and things so that we can place everything relative to each other as the project goes on. Because some of these are like 3-year-long projects. So we have to have some sort of system of matching the new data with our old data.
And again, that's where control is so important. And then we've got a question here about different deliverable options. Talk about some of the different deliverables that you turn data over for your clients. And I think we can do a quick answer to that. I do want to make a quick plug. As you'll notice on the scandibim University website, we've got kind of the entire soup to nuts workflow for scandibim in a series of webinars coming up. Of course, the 8th one is focused on deliverables, which if Jamie has a deliverable due next week, that's not going to be any help to you in July. But for a real deep dive on deliverable options, come back and join us in July, Jamie. But the short answer is this is where understanding that intent at the very beginning is so important. If you understand the intent of how they're going to use it, you probably know what deliverables the customer needs. Because obviously there's tons of file formats for scans, tons of, whether it's CAD files or model files or, IFC files, or, there's so many different options. What's kind of the most common stuff that you see that you're delivering, Sam?
So we almost always deliver the recap file. Most of our clients like to have the real views, which is good and bad. I mean, it's good because you get more information that way. It's nicer to look at, but bad because it makes the file size so big. So there's kind of with those, but almost always we're giving over a recap file. Some clients specifically request, like E57s or something, but generally it's just a recap file. And then we actually list our deliverables on the proposals that we hand out so that they know exactly what they're getting. We'll usually do another point cloud file for the drone site. We do photogrammetry of the entire site. So often we'll have that. We usually do a PDF, both the scan map, like the final scan map, and then if for big projects, we'll split the recap file up into smaller pieces. So if they're using it in Revit, they can turn off on and off different areas so it doesn't bog down their computer maybe. And so we'll turn over a map that shows where those areas are, as well as where all the scan locations are. And then for modeling jobs, we'll turn over, obviously, the model. Maybe they want PDFs of floor plans or Autodesk or AutoCAD exports, but then also a PDF of any areas where there's some more information they need. Like we modeled this area, but we couldn't access it when we were on site, so it's based on floor plans only. Or here is a big discrepancy between the plans and the actual model data, that kind of information that they might find useful when they're actually using the Revit model or whichever deliverable they prefer. But I guess pointing out ahead of time exactly what they're getting is important, and then that's what we turn over.
I would add, I agree with everything Sam just said. I would flip the question. I think the question was what should be delivered or what is the deliverable? I would say what should not be the deliverable is a massive hard drive with 57 gigabytes of something that the client probably has never seen before. They get and then accompanied by an invoice for your job. I think that is a mistake because it makes the whole reality capture, building documentation industry look bad. The number of clients we've worked with who have had a bad experience through using LiDAR scan data is generally it all boils down to one bad experience that probably had to do with somebody who scanned and handed off a huge file that they didn't know what to do with. So I would just say whatever the deliverable is, ensure that your client can work with it. It's suitable for the design intent or for the intent of the project, and hold their hand just to know that there's going to be a little bit of accompaniment with that handoff. There's going to be a little tail to that job where you will, I think everybody benefits if that's the case, and you'll have repeat clients and happier clients who are pleased having worked with you. So I don't know if you would, if y'all would disagree with any of that or not.
Yeah, no, to that point, I would say we almost always schedule a meeting when we hand it over. So, I mean, in the past, that was in person. If we're handing a hard drive to them, we'll sit down on their computer and show them how to use the data, what they can do with it. Now, it's usually a web meeting, and we'll say, this is what you can do in recap. You can take measurements. You can look at these real views. We set up this floor plan for you. So we set up so that when you're in the real views, you can actually go to different floors in your cut view. And so we'll just show them what they can do with it. And then we'll say, this is how you bring it into Revit. This is how you work with scan data in Revit, so on and so forth. So there is like an extra hour, at least of somebody's time, once you're delivering this data, showing people how to use it. And obviously being available if they have questions later on.
Totally true. Kelly, you had asked if we have any FAQs. I've mentioned that one. We actually have two, because we have an FAQ document that we send off with our point cloud data that says this is how you bring it into Revit, this is how it honors view ranges, this is how you change the RGB, this is the coordinate system, shared coordinates, all those sort of tips and tricks that make the client's life a lot easier.
I think John's going to be giving you a call afterwards asking if you're willing to share that.
And don't send your invoice.
So we've got an interesting one here. We're only going to do another question or two and call it a day. But any tips for using scandibim for real-time confirmation of proceeding work and order support prefabrication or follow-up work? John knows why I've picked this one as something we should answer. Anybody want to jump on that, or am I just going to do a shameless plug?
Well, have you looked into any of the Clear Edge products?
Yes. Feels to me like they should use a clear.
I'll do the shameless plug for you.
Yeah, we've got Verity, which basically compares scans to models and as-built model in Navisworks, so that you can rerun your clash detection sets against an as-built Navis model. And one of the reasons we did that was to support prefabrication, so that you can go scan after the piping subcontractors put in the chilled water lines, update the Navisworks model, and then update your fabrication model so that the ductwork you're fabricating fits around or under or over those as necessary. So it kind of automates that process rather than you having to do it manually. But yeah, this is a great, I mean, this is what we were doing on the Kimball Art Museum project that I worked on back at DEC. This was, we were out there constantly scanning stuff because we had like our plenum space. We had one plenum for 2 floors, like both floors were served through one plenum, and it was like a 3-foot deep plenum for a museum with like extreme humidity controls and all sorts of other stuff. So it was nuts what we had to cram into 3 feet. So super useful workflow. Let's see here. For a one-man team like myself, doing the scans, processing, registering, and doing the modeling, do you have any advice on how to prioritize my backlog of hundreds of scans to catch up on, to show my chain of command that I'm getting buried doing it all myself? Sounds like somebody's team needs to scale a little bit. Any advice?
I mean,
I don't know how to answer that question other than to say that there's a lot of resources out there, professionals like those on the panel here and many others. There's great resources for finding them. On the laser scanning forum, there's a group where you can search for service providers. John and the USIBD has a great network of people. So there are folks out there to help, and we're happy to do so.
highly agree with that and recommend you start to build your network of partners. Even if you don't use them, you got them in your pocket so that, you're getting buried and you're getting into trouble. You don't want to do that. You're going to destroy your reputation. It's much better to, pull in a partner, get your deliverables over the finish line in a timely manner and maintain your reputation than to, let things be late because you're trying to do it all yourself.
Yeah, we've all been there before and somebody else has helped us. And so I totally agree. That's why we all exist.
Yeah, I mean, there are tools that can make you more efficient. There are tools that, if you're not, kind of using the various different things that are out there to help you with extraction and conversion and blah, blah, blah. There's certainly software investments that you can make to improve your productivity. But if you've got a backlog of hundreds of scans and you're the only person doing this and they're just flowing in the door, it's not probably a matter of prioritization. It's a matter of scale. And so whether that's partners or building up an ROI scenario so that you can show the benefit of hiring up a second person to work with you to do the work. Again, think of it like a business and think about how you can kind of prove that case out to your chain of command, rather than just showing them that you're, hopelessly overwhelmed.
The one point I think I want to make on that is that you're going to be the most productive when you do things in succession. So like you're scanning, registering, and then modeling the same project all in a row versus, scanning a space and then going back and registering something different. It's going to take a lot of time for you to get reoriented every time you switch from project to the next one. So I think really sticking with the same project until at least for the scanning and then the registration, before moving on to something different, is going to be, make a big difference. And then as far as for proving that you're overwhelmed, just saying, I'm still working on this project from 4 weeks ago, maybe a good enough point through. I don't know.
Efficient data. Yeah, that's we've all been there, certainly. All right, well, we've still got like 40 something questions. We're obviously not going to be answering those today. I'm going to call it right now. I will try and follow up on the rest of the questions. If any of them are specifically for panelists, I'll send it to them. And we're going to try and get those questions and answers posted on the LinkedIn Scandibim University group. Or we may do like a little short 30-minute Q&A answer call, video recording or something that we post, because we've done those in the past too. So TBD on that, but if you're still here, oh my God, thank you for staying this long. You're crazy to listen to us for that long. And thank you so much to wonderful panelists. Look them up on LinkedIn, look them up on Twitter, look them up on whatever. Find them, talk to them. They're approachable, wonderful people, happy to help build that professional network. Yeah, stay in touch. Hope to see everybody on one of the many forums that we're all on. So thank you all.
Thanks, Kelly. See you, John. See you, Sam.
You guys.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.